Okay, what we're going to do here is insert a chart. We're going to use a bar graph, a chart like this to represent the data on this spreadsheet. We've calculated our means, our standard deviations. Now we want a visual representation of that data in the form of a chart. So our finished product might look something like this. To get started, let me explain here. We've got your data in a staggered table like this. The reason for that, although we might create a nice succinct data table that's easy to read like this, Google Sheets won't be able to really use this to create a bar graph. Each bar here is going to be represented by a different column or a series of data. So Google Sheets is going to treat this whole column as one series of data, this column as one series of data, this column as one series of data. So if we want a separate bar graph for all three subjects, then all three subjects have their own column here. And that's the purpose for this staggering our data. So that'd be a good place to start. We can label this a variety of ways. Here in this first column, we've got our subjects by name. We could also, have them across the top. This could represent our, mean. So there's a variety of ways to present the data, and it may affect the way your chart looks, but those are also things you can go back and edit later. Anyway, let's highlight all of this information because that's what we want to create our chart from. We can go to Insert, Chart, and it generated a column bar chart for us. Google Sheets will kind of estimate what type of chart you're after. If you want to overrule that and change, say you wanted a pie chart instead, or you wanted something fancy, you can choose a scatter plot. But we did want a column chart. So let's choose that. And then there's lots of formatting things we can change. So some of this will be a matter of getting in there and playing around with the format, both our setup and our customization options. So we've got a column chart. We can play around with any of these features. It's telling you where it's getting. This will tell you where it's pulling the information that's on your x-axis. This will tell you where it's getting the data for each series. So there's some things you can get in there and change. If you want this information to show up down here, then you can flip the way you've presented your information in the data table, but you can also do so manually later. This would also be a good place to start with what information you want showing where. If it's not showing up the way you like, start with changing some of these settings and see how it affects the information. I like this, with our bars labeled at the bottom, so I might choose that option. If you want it color coded at the top, you can choose that, and we can just delete this information down here. So lots of ways to approach this. Some of it's going to be a matter of you getting in there and playing around. The next thing I've moved to is here, we can change some setup on our horizontal axis. We can change some setup on our vertical axis. For instance, the minimum value. This is showing 0 to 15 right now. If you don't like that or you want to scale it differently, you could play around with those values. If you wanted, some breathing room above your bars, those are things you can change. So further setup, if you want grid lines to show up, if we want to do that to our vertical axis, if we want minor grid lines to show up, if we want tick marks on our axis to show up, you can play around with quite a few of the settings there. Okay, but the main thing we want to add to our chart here is our standard deviation. That information we've calculated, and we can enter for each of our bars. For that, we'll want to go to Series, because each of this is our separate series. So we don't want to apply to all series. We want to select one at a time. Remember, our error bars are representations of our standard deviation. So those are unique to each. So we want to apply our error bars individually. So I've chosen my blue series here, which represents our first subject, Matthew. Under series, you can scroll down, and here we can select error bar. So our error bar has shown up on our chart now, but we want to size it correctly. We want to size it according to the standard deviation. So that's not represented as a percent, but we can enter our constant value. Just means we can enter the value at 1.32, 1.32. Oops, constant. And now our error bar should be sized correctly. We can move on to our next series of data. So I'm going to go back up here and select Mark. And we come down and add his error bar with a constant value of this 0.25. Now that's a small standard deviation, so we would expect that to create a small error bar, and it did. So we think we're on the right track here. And then we can add our third series with the standard deviation of 2.34. Error bar. Okay, and the next thing we can do, if we want this to not only be visually represented, we can apply this to all the series, but we can add a data label here. So not only will that, instead of just be visually represented, but we can see our mean. So by clicking to add our data label, we can do that. And if you don't like the way that that's showing up, we can change the position of it, because here it's above and it's kind of conflicting with my error bar. I can decide I want it to be centered or down below or inside the base. So play around there. That looks good in the center. We might want to go back to changing any of the labels. I do think we want to label our vertical axis. So let's give that a name. Oh, we'll have to do that under setup. Just kidding. How about chart and axis titles? So we can give our whole chart a better title. Let's call that mean 100 meter sprint time, or whatever clever title you'd like to give it. There's no units associated with the numbers here, so we can do the same for our vertical axis. We can definitely include our unit of seconds there. Lots of options for changing, formatting, both style and content. So lots of customization to do. Including lime green always makes the best color for bar graphs. So if you'd like to do that, knock yourself out. We can really change the style and lots of adjustments we can make. So some of that will be trial and error. Get in there, create a chart, make sure your axes are labeled